Section 4. In this section, you will hear a lecture about sports in Britain. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Having a drink at the local pub, going for a walk in the country, or watching sports on the television. These are all the main ways in which many British people like to relax on weekends or holidays. Such activities tell us about how modern British people like to spend their leisure time. But if you look more closely, we can see that these activities are not just recent inventions, but are deeply rooted in the British culture over many centuries. Today we will talk about some sports which we see played throughout the world and were born in Britain. Let's begin with football. As we all know, Britain is the place of origin of modern football. The idea of sports having seasons, like the football season, also comes from the natural rhythms of an agricultural society, where the timing of harvests and the general weather affected how people spent their time. Football is played in early spring, when the weather is wet and not too cold. In winter, bad weather kept people indoors, and they had not so much work to do on their farm. So, men used to doing hard work, or physical labor, found they needed to release their energy, and so got together regularly to play boisterous and fast games like football. Meanwhile, during the Renaissance, football had been regarded as a rough sport for the aristocratic young men, although all social classes used to join in on the local football match. Today, violence is still associated with football. Football hooligans, supporters of rival teams, sometimes clash before, during and after matches, and run riot through the city or town, breaking windows and beating each other up. Of course, the football violence gets a lot of attention. Nowadays, before some big matches when trouble is expected, police usually patrol the streets, pubs close to the football courts, and some shops, and even lock their doors and shutter their windows. The Football Association was set up in 1863. It is the league or association that the major teams compete in, for a trophy title known as the FA Cup. The Football Association puts out a series of measures to control violence, so as to ensure a successful match. A more gentle sport that is very popular in the world is tennis. Wimbledon, a town near London, is where the world's top players gather to compete. It has been one of the major sports events of the British calendar. As we all know, tennis was invented in Britain, but few people know tennis owes its origins to the church. According to the records, by the mid-15th century, people were making a game of bouncing a ball off the side of their local churches or cathedrals, first using the hand and later a racket. Football, archery, tennis, and other sports were frequently played in churchyards. In England, the sound of summer is said to be the sound of leather on the willow, the ball hitting a cricket bat. Cricket was one of the very first team sports in Britain to be played according to the same organised rules nationally. Before the Victorian era, and in modern Britain, people from all walks of life played cricket. But in the 19th century, cricket became a sport associated with the upper classes. It was a kind of snob game, played by boys who attended public schools. and then the sport became popular in the public school system in the colonies of Australia, New Zealand, India, and Pakistan. British is full of idioms to the sport. Those who are not familiar with the game will be baffled by it, such as, "That's not cricket" means that's not fair, and "to play the game" means to be fair. The true sport of British kings and queens is not skiing or golfing, but horse racing. National horse races have been held throughout Britain for hundreds of years. The horse at the heart of medieval life was a symbol of authority and wealth and necessary to travelling, hunting, and warfare. The sport of riding a horse is still considered rather snobbish, or an aristocratic sport, because the average British family cannot afford to own a horse. Meanwhile, there are stables which rent horses and offer riding courses at affordable prices. So certainly, almost everyone can afford to place a bet on a horse race now and then. As a sport of kings, kings and commoners alike enjoy betting on horses. The Queen, who likes riding, also likes betting on horses, and often attends some major races. Although she is extremely rich, she gets very excited when the horse she has placed her money on wins. There are two kinds of horse racing. The flat race, where horses and riders compete on a flat, oval track. And the steeplechase, which is racing either across the countryside or around a course designed to represent the obstacles you might overcome in the countryside. The Grand National, which is set up in 1837 and is the world's most famous steeplechase. However, some horses are usually injured and badly hurt. Horses are sometimes shot. Animal lovers cannot accept that animals should be hurt and killed for people's entertainment. The biggest social event related to horse racing is the Royal Ascot, where people dress up and show off how fashionable they are, as well as watch the races and place their bets. Women especially wear very delicate and exotic hats and dress designed for the occasion. Television and newspapers will often comment on their outfits.
This is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Section 4. You will hear a lecture about marine life. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
How many fish are in the sea? It's a hot topic for many scientists. Today we have invited a famous scientist who spent 10 years studying marine life to give us an introduction of the latest survey called The Census of Marine Life. Let's welcome Alok Jha.
Thanks, Ella. The Census of Marine Life has been the biggest and most comprehensive attempt ever to answer that question. How many fish are in the world's oceans? The Census of Marine Life, which hopes to indicate a baseline of marine life, estimates that there are more than 230,000 species in the sea. The study covers from coast to the open ocean, from the shallows to the deeps, from little things like microbes to large things such as fish and whales. A team of over 360 scientists from all over the world have spent the past 10 years surveying 25 regions, from the Antarctic through to the temperate and tropical seas to the Arctic, to count the different types of plants and animals. The findings indicate that crustaceans such as lobsters, crabs, krill, and barnacles account for a fifth of the number of species in the world's oceans, and half of the world's marine species is mollusk, squid and octopus, and fish, including sharks. The charismatic species usually used in propagating environmental protection, for example whales, sea lions, turtles, and seabirds, account for less than 2% of the species in the world's oceans. The study has also focused on major fields of concern for conservationists. In every region, they got the same experience of a major collapse of what were usually very abundant fish stocks or crabs or crustaceans that are now only 5 to 10% of what they used to be. The main reasons include overfishing, degraded habitats, and pollution. But more problems are presented. Rising water temperatures and acidification brought by climate change and the growth in areas of the ocean that are low in oxygen and therefore unable to support marine life. The Census of Marine Life shows that enclosed seas, such as the Mediterranean Sea, the Gulf of Mexico, China's shells, the Baltic, and the Caribbean, have the most threatened biodiversity. The pollutions in enclosed seas are mainly from chemicals or garbage that people throw into it. Dense coastal populations of humans also tend to be packed along enclosed seas, meaning rising contaminations and extraction of more biodiversity from the water. The Mediterranean Sea, which contains around 17,000 identified species, has been a region with high threat. Scientists in our team studying the Mediterranean identified problems related to increased litter from shipping and munitions across the sea, as well as bombs discharged during the Kosovo War. The Mediterranean also has to face problems with invasive species, displacing the creatures that already live there. The Census of Marine Life shows that the Mediterranean Sea has the most alien species, more than 600, among all the 25 regions that have been surveyed. It looks like the region with coral reefs has always had a very high rate of speciation. It also has a very diverse range of habitats, from the deepest regions of the ocean to large regions of shallow seas which can afford coral reefs. The most diverse regions identified by the Census of Marine Life are around Australian and Japanese waters, which contain more than 30,000 species each, and are among the most biologically diverse in the world. Next in line are the oceans of China, the Mediterranean Sea, and the Gulf of Mexico. Besides algae and the seabirds and mammals that travel around the sea, viperfish has been regarded as the most cosmopolitan marine creature by the Census of Marine Life. Its presence was recorded in around a quarter of the world's seas. And for every marine species of all kinds known to science, scientists of the Census of Marine Life estimate that at least 4 have yet to be discovered. For example, about 70% of species of fish have been discovered, but for most other groups, likely less than 1/3 are known. Our research team has found the number of marine fish species was about 16,764 and was growing at around 100 a year. So scientists estimate that there are almost 22,000 fish species in the world's oceans. The most fruitful potential areas for discovery include the tropics, deep seas, and southern hemisphere. Although most ocean organisms still remain nameless, and their numbers unknown at the end of the census of marine life. We still gained an important and exciting start.
Definitely. That's a great achievement.
Thank you very much.
OK, thanks to Alok for giving the amazing information about marine life. Next week we will...
This is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Section 4. You will hear a conversation about astronomy. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40. This is Magic Time from the BBC. I am Faith. In today's programme, we invite a Professor of Astronomy. Welcome, Lewis.
Thanks a lot, Faith.
What magic information will you introduce to us?
We all know the Leonidas in August are coming, so today let's talk about meteors.
Good topic. At one time or another, almost everyone has glimpsed a swift little streak of light dashing across the night sky. Nearly everyone makes wishes when they see them and blame both good and bad luck on their presence.
Yes, these sudden celestial visitors are meteors. We often call it shooting star. The glowing trails are caused by the incineration of a piece of celestial debris entering our atmosphere.
Many meteors are quick flashes, but some last long enough for us to track their brief course across the sky.
Right. Now and then, a meteor truly will light up the night, blazing brighter than Venus, although rarely, even brighter than the moon, leaving in its wake a dimly glowing trail that may persist for minutes.
Lewis, can we see some meteors every night in 1 year?
Yes. Under a dark sky, any observer can expect to see between 2 and 7 meteors each hour, any night of the year. These are sporadic meteors.
Sporadic meteors?
Yes. Their source bodies, meteorids, are part of the dusty background of the inner solar system. Several times during the year, Earth encounters swarms of small particles that greatly increase the number of meteors. The result is a meteor shower, during which observers may see dozens of meteors every hour. Concentrations of material within the swarms may produce better than average displays in some years, with rates of hundreds per hour, and were treated to a truly amazing display in which thousands of visible meteors can be seen for a brief period. The phenomenon is called meteor storms, which are more magnificent than meteor showers.
Aha! That's wonderful!
Definitely. The meteors that appear during a meteor shower seem to come from one point in the sky. This illusion is an effect of perspective, just as a roadway seems to converge in the distance. Usually, meteor showers get the name of the constellation from which the meteors appear to radiate. Such as during the Perseid shower in August, meteors seem to streak from a point in the constellation Perseus.
When is the biggest meteor storm?
According to records, in 1833, a storm of 60,000 meteors an hour shocked the world.
60,000? That's unbelievable!
By the 1860s, scientists had known that many meteor showers were annual, including the normally placid Leonids, which produced the big storm, and that they were somehow related to comets.
Really?
Yes, but most of the meteors people have seen during one of the annual showers arise from fluffy particles not much larger than sand grains. As a particle enters Earth's atmosphere, it collides with gas atoms and molecules. The particle becomes wrapped in a glowing sheath of heated air and vaporized material boiled off its own surface.
Whether meteor is very near to us when it appears?
No, in fact, it is an illusion. However, even well-trained professionals can be fooled, such as airline pilots have swerved to avoid meteors that were actually 160 kilometers away. A meteor that appears brighter than any of the stars and planets is a fireball.
Fireball? That's so interesting.
Yeah. Most meteors are seen 80 to 120 kilometers above the ground. Sometimes someone will claim to see a fireball land on a hilltop. But in fact, a real fireball first appears at a height of about 125 kilometers and loses its brightness while still at least 20 kilometers above the ground.
Yes. What colours do meteors have?
Usually, most meteors look white, but some also appear blue, green, yellow, orange, or even red.
What will happen if a meteoroid gets to the surface of the Earth without being completely vaporized?
It will be a meteorite.
I heard meteorites were long ago thought to be cast down as gifts from angels.
Yes, and others thought the gods were displaying their anger.
Really?
As late as the 17th century, many believed they fell from thunderstorms. They were nicknamed thunderstones. Many scientists didn't believe the accounts of people who claimed to have seen meteors, and some experts were skeptical that stones could fall from the clouds or the heaven.
Yes.
One of the most significant meteorite events in recent history destroyed hundreds of square miles of forest in Siberia on June the 30th, 1908. According to local witnesses, a ball of fire streaked through the sky and seemed to enter the atmosphere at an oblique angle. It exploded, sending out hot winds and loud noises, and shaking the ground enough to break windows in nearby villages. Small particles blown into the atmosphere lit the night sky for several days.
So, nowadays, the prevailing theory holds that a meteor exploded just above the surface.
Yes. Most impact craters and basins larger than the meteor crater are heavily worn away or have been buried by rocks and dirt as the Earth's surface changed. At present, Chicxulub Basin, centered in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, is the largest one. The diameter of basin is around 300 kilometers. Rock samples obtained by drilling into the basin show that an asteroid struck the Earth there about 65 million years ago.
Does that the same period with the dinosaurs disappeared?
That's right. Many scientists believe this debris caused climate changes which made the dinosaurs not survive.
We do really hope that will never happen again.
Right.
OK, thanks for watching today's programme. See you next week. This is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Section 4. You will hear part of a lecture about writing for radio. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
We're going to move on today to look at some of the key principles of writing for radio. Of course, the main thing that you have to remember is that a radio script is not written to be read, but to be spoken and heard. Now, putting this into practice is more difficult than it seems, because writing as we speak involves abandoning many of the normal rules of writing that have been taught to us from an early age. This is because we need to concentrate on how the piece sounds. Written words convey information, but they don't convey the full meaning of what you want to say. They don't tell you what to emphasise, what speed something should be read at, or where the pauses should come. So these have to be indicated in a script. Whatever is said on radio, whether it's a link to a magazine programme, a film review, or even a voice piece in the news, needs to sound as if it's coming from the mind of the speaker, almost like part of a conversation, rather than something that's being read. Before you begin to write, it's a good idea to know who you're talking to visualise a typical member of the radio station's audience. If you're writing a film review for a local audience, for example, think about how you'd tell your grandmother about the film. Or if you're reviewing a pop concert, think about how you tell your friend about the band. The words have much more impact if each person feels they're being spoken to directly. So your tone needs to be informal. Rather than using impersonal words like listeners or the audience, you can make it more informal. Include them in what you're saying by referring to us and we. Once you know who you're talking to, the next thing is to work out what you're going to say. Don't forget that the person listening to you has no opportunity to ask questions. And in the same way, you can't repeat what you've just said. For these reasons, it's important that your script is logical and progresses smoothly. Too many facts too close together will cause confusion, so space them out evenly. The best scripts allow listeners to visualise what you're describing. For example, instead of giving the physical dimensions of a field, describe it as being the size of, say, a football pitch. If you're talking about a tall building, relate it to perhaps a 10-storey block of flats. Now, all scripts need something that will grab the attention of the listener. You need something that'll make them say, "Hey, I want to stop and listen to this." So the first sentence has to do this for you. It needs to be intriguing, interesting, and then it needs to be backed up by a second sentence that explains what you're talking about. The last sentence should also give your listeners food for thought and can be in the form of a question or a statement that sums up the item. After you've finished your script, you need to polish it up. And the most effective method of doing this is by reading it aloud. This also helps you to avoid tongue twisters or words that you might find awkward to pronounce.
That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Section 4. You will hear part of a lecture on the current and future use of mobile phones. You now have 30 seconds to read questions 31 to 35.
Okay, now today we're looking at changes in communication, and specifically changes that have just happened or are likely to happen in the next few years. Key to this is the mobile phone, which is increasingly being seen as an all-purpose system rather than just a phone. If you only use your phone for texting and making calls now, you will be amazed at how you'll be using it in the future. The technology has been developed for a range of other uses. For example, phones could be used so that if you are meeting someone and they get lost, you could send them a map of your location to help them. This will save all those complicated explanations over the phone and our poor friends or colleagues trying to drive and find out where they are at the same time. And if you get bored waiting, or if you're traveling, for example, you will soon be able to see TV news on your phone as it is actually being broadcast. This means that you won't have to miss any of your favorites if you are away for a few days. Most people have got used to texting now, and young people send pictures to each other. But what is exciting is the possibility of putting music with them before you send them. And it's not all frivolous. Phones are going to become even more critical in business and education. Some recent developments have a highly practical usage. So, for example, as lecturers, we will be able to send everybody a text to let them know if lectures have been cancelled. And the new phones could have a further use in education, as well as business, as they will enable us to go to any destination, such as when we are doing a field trip, for instance, and from there to send data directly to a computer so that we can access it when we get home. This means we will no longer be limited by what the phone can store.
You now have 30 seconds to read questions 36 to 40.
And it's interesting to look at the different ways that men and women use phones now, as that does affect how the technology will develop. Some research has been done on how people use phones, and some of the results are surprising. One of the increasing usages of mobile phones is to get all sorts of data, such as phone numbers, the weather, train times, etc. And while there's been an attempt to set up connections with things that women might be interested in accessing, it is overwhelmingly men who do this. But what about the traditional use of a phone? To speak to people? I suppose we would predict that it is mainly women who use phones as a method of contact for friends and family, but, in fact, the genders exploit this facility equally. I've spoken about the increased business usages that phones will offer, and I suppose we would associate this usage with men. The survey picked up, though, that women are often working from home or catching up with work in the evenings, so they use phones in this way as much as men do. Most of us are aware we can store photos on our phones. It's an ideal method of capturing a moment wherever you are. Women tend to be the group that keep photos on their phones, but it seems that men use their phones to actually take pictures much more than women do. And of course, all this knowledge affects the marketing that the companies will do in order to sell the phone.
That is the end of section 4. You will now have half a minute to check your answers.